Hey, welcome to our podcast.
Welcome. We're still working on the title.
We
So the Elias Today podcast so far.
exactly, yeah, untitled for now.
Yes.
The topic for today is extreme dating boundaries? Question mark.
Extreme or just
Extreme.
dating boundaries in general.
We're gonna get into it, so you guys can see, what title you think fits best. We're gonna start with an icebreaker. So, Susie,
Yes.
why are boundaries important? Are they important at all?
Our dating boundaries
Exactly.
specifically important. I would say yes. I think I'm the more extreme belief, I guess, in terms of boundaries. I think they're very important
Why?
because I think without boundaries, you are going to go too far every time. In a speaking specifically about Christian relationships, but it really can apply to all relationships. I think you should protect yourself. As a Christian, I think you should protect yourself from violating what God sees as holy and pure and beautiful. But even, in a non-Christian relationship, there are still things that are sacred that shouldn't be violated unless I don't know. I guess that's a hard subject for non-Christian relationships because I think that it's becoming more and more loose nowadays. The idea of marriage and covenant and all that. I guess is more a Christian, Judeo-Christian idea. So, but yeah. Anyways,
Well, I would say for people, for even for non-Christians, I think you can use boundaries as a measure of the quality of the relationship. If you're in a relationship where there are no boundaries and that's not a conversation in your relationship, then it's probably not. It's probably a measure that this relationship might not be a long-term relationship or might not be a good long-term relationship if you never talk about boundaries or you did talk about boundaries and they're never respected. Because we're going to be talking a lot about physical boundaries, but there are other boundaries as well about, boundaries with finances, even, or boundaries with what things we talk about. Um, you know, there's a lot of, you can take boundaries a lot of different ways. But thank you for answering my question. The format of this is probably going to be more of a kind of interviewee kind of conversation. So
yeah,
we're going to work on that.
like you're sitting down with us as we have a conversation.
Exactly.
Got back from work, got cozy, and we're just sitting down having a conversation.
Indeed. Well, do you have a question you want to ask me, one of our icebreakers, or something else just to get us started?
I guess a question would be before you were in a relationship with me, what did you see? What were your like boundaries before you even were in a relationship, a serious dating towards a marriage relationship
Well,
as a
I
Christian?
think as a Christian, my boundaries were very extreme. Um, I don't think I had any close female friends at all. And so there wasn't really any opportunity to be close to any girl. I think my circle was just exclusively guys. And I think that kind of protected me. I think, I had my own personal boundaries in terms of like things I looked at, things I watched, things I listened to. In terms of person to person,
Yeah.
I would say that was my deal.
But like specifically, can you give examples? You said extreme. What do you mean by extreme? Because extreme is a relative word for each individual. Is it extreme for in general population today, society, or extreme for even Christians, most Christians, or what would why do you describe it as extreme?
Well, I think I just comparing myself to the guys I grew up with. I felt like for a lot of them, it wasn't strange for them to have like female friends that they were close with. That for me, like a side hug was like the limit of physical touch with a woman. Like, even when we were dating, we'll get to that. But I felt very uncomfortable around women before I was dating, before I got married. You know, I think part of that, I was a Christian. I didn't want to get anywhere close to having any lustful thoughts or lustful feelings, and I think so. That was part of why I put up those boundaries. But your question was like how extreme. So I think like
Why?
that.
Why do you describe it as? But I guess you answered that. Sorry, to interrupt, but you kind of answered that. I guess extreme in comparison to your guy friends at the time or current guy friends. Can you give an example? You did say that the side hug.
The side hug, I would say. I mean, I think I would feel awkward giving side hugs, and I'm sure it was sensed by my friends that I would give a side hug to. But I think that I can't think of a time in particular when I did give somebody a side hug. But yeah, I feel, I mean, I think maybe I have part of it is maybe more traditional values as well, where I don't really want to be physical with a woman unless it's like that's a very clear expectation. I don't want to overstep even by accident.
Yeah.
So I mean that could be boundaries, and I think that's also maybe just that's a woman. I don't really want to get physical with her for any reason, unless there is a good reason, and unless that's like our level of intimacy. So yeah.
You're creating like earthquake sounds with your tapping. Just
I am.
FYI.
Oh, sorry about that audio.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, as I said before, I believe that our society in general, not Christian society, I guess, or, that microcosm of society that we dwell in, but society in general, the world, I guess you could say, is walking away from everything normal. So I think I think that is creeping into Christian society. And I think that people are adopting different a different line of what's too far.
Okay.
I think they in some cases even like abandoning what the Bible calls is too far. The boundary that goes from crosses it to sin, basically.
Yeah. Well, sorry to interrupt. I guess to kind of frame our perspective of physical boundaries, for us, we believe marriage should be reserved. Sex should be reserved for marriage. So I got mixed up there. Sex should be reserved for marriage, and all forms of sex. I mean, this podcast is not for young ears. Oral, penetrative, like that. All forms of sex, we would say, is for marriage. There's no form of sex that should be outside of marriage.
Yeah. For me, I think that anything that can bind you to a person should also be reserved for marriage. Had a, I think I had a very extreme, quote unquote, view on boundaries as well. Partly ones that had been there just simply from reading the Bible and my relationship with God, and also some that were formed after relationships where boundaries were not good or respected, I guess. It became very extreme. So at the point where we courted or dated, they were very extreme. And yeah, we had lots of conversations about that. I don't know if you want to go into that.
Yeah, well, I mean that's one of the big parts of this podcast is to talk about our impersonal experience, so you can learn from our mistakes and hopefully learn from some of the stuff we think that we did well, or things that we learned along the way. So I mean, I'll share my experience of our boundaries, and then you can add some of yours, well, as well. So we met in 2018, and we met at a church convention, as many of you know, I'm sure. And we were not dating then. Like I said, that was 2 weeks we give or take, was when we met each other, and we became really quick friends, more than friends probably, but we didn't really have a label for it that early on. So our boundaries then were no kissing. Um, we hugged, and we kind of hugged on the side and on the front.
Wait,
And
sorry, are you saying when we weren't officially dating
yeah, well,
at
I'm
this
saying
point?
just when we met. I'm just from the beginning.
Okay. I mean, no kissing was out of the question.
Well, I mean,
Just so
it's not like
funny.
we spoke about it, but it wasn't like we didn't lean in for a kiss. Like for both of us, it was like
No, I was
that's
very
not on our
anti that.
radar.
Yeah.
We didn't really have like a verbal boundary. Like there was no topic that was really off limits in those early days.
Uh,
So I mean, I'm talking about super early days,
okay.
but
I think by nature of the fact that we were still getting to know each other, I think that made it so that there were unspoken boundaries, not because they were being enforced, but because of the fact that we didn't know each other that well.
sure,
So I agree with that, but kind of with the caveat that is because we were still getting to know each other. Most people, when they first meet, they don't just jump straight into the nitty gritty, gory details.
oh, true, true.
So we didn't make a boundary for that necessarily. It just, subconsciously was there because of societal rules and norms of interaction.
Sure. You're right. I mean, I guess there's kind of an assumed boundaries, but I remember even in that first 2 weeks, we did talk about some boundaries. I kind of said, hey, this is a little bit embarrassing, but like when we hug on the front, that's a little too much for me.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, like I think we might have to do side hugs just because I felt like my body was like going too fast, too far in, in a timing that was not right because we were married yet.
Yeah. We had just barely that. I know we weren't even talking about marriage. Well, I think it's a good thing to point out that we marriage was brought up very quickly in between us in the sense that we established that we liked each other, that we were interested in each other, and then basically our boundary was that we're not just going to go from we like each other to we're just going to do whatever we want and date even though we aren't sure if it's going to lead towards marriage. So if you could see that as kind of our first boundary, as in by saying that though we like each other, we're not going to pass the boundary out into dating until we are both sure that this will lead to a godly marriage.
Yeah, well, and I think you could say that's extreme because I mean, even that by the end of that 2 weeks, we were already getting questions by people asking us if we were dating, and I think is a natural progression in the world and even in the church that when people of the opposite gender start getting really close to each other and they're of a certain age, you assume that they want to get married or that they're gonna want to have more of an intimate time together. But I think, as a Christian, I think we should be cautious of our feelings. Not that we should deny our feelings, but our feelings can lead us astray. You
Yeah.
know, I think especially in a romantic setting.
Yeah, I think if talking about extreme boundaries, I think that is one that have a more extreme view on is dating or courting, whatever you want to call it. Well, I guess I could say I don't like dating. I like courting, which, the way I see it, courting is kind of dating, but with the intention of being married from the get go. Whereas dating is kind of like, well, let's just see where this goes. It might end up in breakup, it might not. And we don't really care to think of the future. And I honestly think that dating culture is like very heavy in Christian society. And I think that it's not necessarily biblical or a good idea. When we look at the Bible, of course, Jewish traditions are very different from our traditions, and yes, societies change. But I think it's a very good practice in that I wouldn't go so far as saying like become betrothed and then you're stuck with that person until marriage or whatever, or you basically almost are married. You basically have to get divorced at that if you're betrothed, you have to get divorced to separate. It's like pretty serious. I wouldn't go that far, but I do think that it sets a good example of like entering into a relationship, a romantic relationship should be a very serious thing. It should be with the intention of getting married.
For sure.
Because I don't think, like other people, that there's any other future or end goal besides, or there shouldn't be rather, besides marriage. Because in the world, it's like, well, we get in a relationship to be physically intimate. That's where one night stands and hookup culture comes from.
Sure.
Or getting together for whatever other gain, basically, I don't think is right. And I think that marriage and all the things that come with it, which are many things that a lot of people, I think a lot of people jump ahead to the things that come with marriage or after marriage, physical intimacy, financial security, living together. Yeah, there's a lot of things that basically should come after a covenant of marriage that people want to get in a relationship and gain without that covenant. So I don't think that's right. I don't think it's biblical. I think it's very common nowadays. But I think the precursor of that is dating with no intention.
Sure.
Or, it starts out that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's invaded the church, I guess you could say, church society.
Sure.
Even our church, I think.
Now, we're more of a conservative church, but I agree with you that, sorry for butting in, but you're right. I think there's more of a move towards something that's less formal, that's less with purpose, something that's more, let's just see what happens and, hopefully something good turns out, but it's not as, well, if I want to get married, I need to look for somebody with the qualities of a biblical husband. I'm kind of more of an intentional path.
Right.
Or wife.
Right. Yeah, I think that it's just the better way to go. You're going to have less heartbreak, less messiness. Looking at the Bible, the way that God commands us to do things and leads us and guides us through His Word is for a purpose. I think He knows us very well because He created us. He's our creator. And He knows how we work, how our brains work, our minds, our hearts work. And so I think it's always good to go back to the Word as a foundation of how I should live my life, to mold how I should go.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, me personally, I went through, the things I went through shaped who I am now. But I think that if I had heard somebody talk about boundaries and talk about dating versus courting and talk about all these things, I think my life probably would have been different. And I'm okay with where it is now because I met you and we were married, and I'm very happy for that. God obviously was, watching over me, protecting me. But I do think that it's a very valuable subject.
No, I agree. I think this is something that, in a way, can't be talked about too much because there's a lot going against that young guy or girl. People are getting interested in each other, the hormones are turning on, the pheromones are turning on. Like, there's a lot pulling you together, so there kind of needs to be an equal amount of things that, not necessarily pulling you apart, but something just to slide in between the two of you to say, okay, this may be something good you have, but for it to be its maximum amount of goodness, for lack of a better word, you need to preserve a little bit of separation in there. Because your body doesn't understand the difference between dating and marriage. For your body, it's all the same.
Right.
So if you only listen to your body, you're going to be doing marriage things in dating times, and it's going to get all mixed up. Like, you're like, why are we dating for 5 years and I'm not getting married? Potentially, you may not see a need for marriage, or one of you may not see a need for marriage because you're already doing marriage stuff
Before.
before marriage.
Right. And
Vice,
if,
sorry.
sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna say, in the event that you are doing, if that were true, and you were doing those things, and you were to break up, because breaking up when you're dating is nothing. Like everybody does. People are doing that every single day and not batting an eye or having a second thought about it. It that covenant of marriage is not there to protect you, to hold you together through the hard times when you don't necessarily like each other, and you ask, why are we together? You remember that covenant, or you should remember that covenant, and say, we made a covenant to each other.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just dating, it's like, we never made a covenant. We never
Sure.
made vows
It's a
to each other.
responsibility.
So you can walk away, and if you're doing those marriage type things, which God created humans for that to bind us together in many different ways, on many different levels, it's gonna be very painful, and you're gonna be torn apart on many different levels. And it's gonna be something that you probably won't ever forget in a bad way.
Well, it's like it's perverted, right? Like, God created sex to bind. He created even kissing or living under the same roof as somebody. Like, there's certain things that will create a unique type of relationship that nothing else will do.
Right.
And those bonds created, once broken, it is a painful emotionally, even physically, and that it's like there's a reason behind that. It's by design. God didn't want you to get to that level of intimacy and then break it. That was meant to be with one person forever.
Yeah.
So there's a reason why it hurts so much when it does go wrong, and it potentially, not always, but potentially can leave a scar, which you can't really get rid of it. It's part of you, and then hopefully it kind of informs something better down the road.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, let's see how much we've done. We still have 7 minutes left.
Did
do-
you? Oh, sorry.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say we can talk a bit more about our story. I think we've been more of in theory so far. I mean, maybe you can share some of what the boundaries looked like for us, and like what we learned, what didn't go so well, and what worked better.
I think I want to preface by saying it is a little bit scary actually talking about your beliefs so openly, because I mean, if this, theoretically is going to go on a public platform, I don't know who will see it,
Theoretically,
who's maybe living this way, or doing the things that we say are not recommended or whatever. And it's just scary, but that is truly the way, I think. And it's not in a way to like condemn, but I do think that, like I said, I think the word is perfect, and I think the word of God is perfect. And I guess if you're offended by that, then I guess I can't do anything about that. But yeah, going into our story, like I said before, I'd been burned very badly in previous relationships in terms of boundaries, and I became very extreme. I had been more kind of extreme before, and it just went kaput because there was no conversation about it. But I don't want to get too much into that. Anyways, so I was pretty strict. I guess I had like preset boundaries that I was like, I'm, this is it. I don't know. I don't really want to go past that because I knew what havoc could be, wreaked upon me if it did. Anyways, I think it was funny because I think you had some boundaries that I was like, oh, okay, that's like pretty extreme. That doesn't mean much to me. and vice versa for you. So I think like the hugging thing, like I'm a very huggy person. I've always been that way. And I love giving hugs, big hugs, strong, crushing hugs. And so when I heard that the hug thing is, maybe not the best idea, that was hard for me. And I think we did struggle with that, maintaining that until marriage. Especially when you came here and it was like right before we got married. I think we it was kind of, we hugged a lot. It was hard not to. The kissing thing, I think you were actually not, like, I was the more strict one on that. I was like, no kissing at all, period. Cheek, lips, anywhere, nothing. I don't want your lips near me, sorry. I mean, I do, and that's why I keep them away. Yeah. So that's funny how that wasn't as strict, but the hugging was. But I guess in a way, I don't know. I guess it's differences in cultures and how you think about, the body touching. Most people I would say see hugging as harmless when really your whole body is touching that person, versus like a kiss is just your lips touching that person. But then there's, a lot of like subconscious psychological things in relation to kissing that make it very intimate. But in different societies, they kiss on the cheek, sometimes even on the mouth, and it doesn't mean much. It means like something friendly. So I think it has to do a lot with how you were raised in society and just a lot of different things. What else? Hand holding. We didn't do that pretty much most of our relationship. Again, I think right before marriage, it was hard. I think we did hold hands. Oh, no. I think those are the most extreme, especially the hand holding. I think a lot of people were like weirded out by that. And I had a lot of questions of why it's literally your hands. But you're not the first guy that I've heard. I've heard a couple other married friends where their husbands also didn't want to hold hands either. So maybe it's a guy thing. Because I don't think I don't know, maybe a girl who this is a problem for her can speak up. But most girls that I've talked to, it's not a thing. Where, holding hands is more intimate or too much or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody has slightly different triggers and has a different past. Like you said, I think there's a lot of factors that go into what turns you on, for lack of a better word. I think we also had some boundaries about what topics we spoke about with each other.
Yeah.
I think sometimes just the conversation is more of a trigger than even any physical touch that we were doing in those early days.
Yes. Which was limited.
Which was limited. I mean, it was mostly a long distance relationship, but I guess it heightened the physical touch when we did get to see each other, for sure. And I would say our dating experience is not the be all and end all. Like, everybody's going to have slightly different triggers, slightly different sensitivities.
Yeah.
But I think in general, this is a good conversation to have early in your marriage, not in your marriage, early in your romantic relationship.
I think it's imperative. I think you should never go without it when you start dating.
Well, and if somebody wants to do it without boundaries, that's a deal breaker, ladies and gentlemen. That's somebody who is not valuing what you guys have together because they don't want to protect it, like you said earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the way I described it to people who had questions for us when we were dating or courting, whatever, when they asked, like, why would you be that extreme? Like, that's a lot. Like, actually, a lot of people who I talked to, they were shocked that we didn't kiss. Very shocked. These are Christian people, let alone hugging and holding hands, which to me, like, kissing was, like, not even ever on the book, ever at all. Even, yeah, anyways, yes. In our relationship, but what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So when I talked to people, how I described it was For me, I never want to get even close to the line that crosses from you're good to you're sinning, you're displeasing God, and it's not good. I didn't want to be close to that line. I didn't want to be on that line, go over it, and I didn't want to be close to it. So to me, like if I see that line is like over here, like really like 100 meters away, I'm gonna make a line that's like at 5 meters, 100 meters away from me. I guess I'm gonna make a line at 5 meters away from me, and I'm gonna try not go over that line. Because then if I do go over that line, I'm still way far away from the line that's the red line.
Yeah, it's a conservative approach.
It's
So you
like,
don't have
because,
to get right up to the danger zone.
right,
You would rather give that buffer of
right,
safety where I'm not saying that, so where you've drawn your line, which is not the actual line, but slightly away from it, that may not be sin there,
no,
but it's close enough to, it's a room that I don't want to even dip my toe that deep into those waters.
yeah. I just wanted a big buffer between what my line is and what God's line is according to the Word of God, which I think is very clear. And I think that was a very wise choice because we did cross our line,
Sure.
our very,
More than once.
yeah. And like I said, like, oh, we held hands and oh no, we hugged. But like, I kind of shudder when I think about what if our line was that red line, quote unquote, that line that you should not go past. Because if it was, and we, oh, we just went over a little bit, it's like not, you just went over a little bit. It's like, it's too far, So I'm very happy. I think our relationship in marriage has not suffered one bit. I think even our relationship during dating was even better because it wasn't fogged up by any sort of guilt or shame or uncertainty or like anything that could have caused come between us and made us question whether this was a relationship leading towards marriage that was, a godly marriage, I guess I could say. We didn't have any of that. And we didn't have any regrets after we're married.
We didn't have any regrets. I think and since you mentioned shame and like, you know, being worried about level of feelings or emotions, I think what we had was a lot of thoughts and feelings that, you know, we knew within marriage would be good, but in the dating marriage side were not so good. So there was that we did have to walk that line of, you know, I can't act on these feelings, and like these feelings in the wrong time could be bad, but within marriage will be good. So it's
Yeah.
very gray area, and it's part of why you have boundaries as well. I think. Sorry for the dog in the background. It's part of why you have boundaries is because it's like it's good and bad at the same time. As a Christian, it's like I know I'm supposed to be attracted to this person, but the level of that attraction or how I act out that attraction can be too far now.
Yeah.
But once I say my vows, will be fine. So
Right.
it's difficult.
I think it is and it isn't. Something that I've always told somebody close to me who struggles with are my thoughts, me, is that you are not your feelings unless you act out your feelings, and you dwell upon them. So in the sense that like it is normal to be attracted to the person that you want to get married to. If you're not, then you probably shouldn't be getting married to them. So those things are normal. When you're dwelling too much to the point where you're walking into fantasy, ungodly fantasy, and that often leads to action. Dwelling upon a thought often leads to action, or can rather. That's when it's not good. But I don't think I think that was something we struggled with, was that, oh, I'm feeling these feelings. I don't want to feel these feelings. In fact, for me, I like kind of despised them. But at the same time, I had to realize that those feelings were normal and not bad unless I took them too far, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, God made us like that for a reason. It's not sin, you know. It's what God would want for us to bind us together, to make a home, to make a family, to lead us into marriage in the first place. I mean, a lot of people. I mean, a big part of marriage is those physical feelings, that the attraction towards each other. You know, the romantic attraction. Without that, you know, I think we wouldn't have as many couples. I think it's by design that we're drawn to each other. And Jesus, God loves to use marriage as an image for Him and the church and everything. So God has a big plan of marriage. But yeah, this has been a great conversation, my dear. Thank you for joining me to talk about boundaries. It went in directions I didn't even predict, really, from the little scripts that we wrote. I'm really thankful. I thank God that we've started this, and I pray we can do many more. Any final words?
Um, I hope nobody thinks we overshared. I'm like trying to trace my thoughts back to think. I hope we didn't. But yeah, I guess my final thought is, I think I want to just be clear that the word of God is your boundary, that like the sure foundation, the sure boundary is going to be found in there. What we did was just what we felt was best according to how we were living, in accordance to the word of God. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, I'm glad we had this talk too. It's a good talk. I think more people need to have it. I think more parents need to have it with their kids, friends, or mentors, rather, with mentees in the church, things like that. So I didn't really have this conversation, and we didn't go super into depth, but I think I hope it helps.
Yeah. If you're dating right now, talk about boundaries. Okay. God bless. Bye.
Bye.